This is the green pen video for the B7 distance learning questions. Quite typical higher paper questions here, so let's take a look. The limpet is a snail-like animal that lives attached to a rock on the seashore. Some students investigated variation in the size of limpets living on two seashores. One shore was in a sheltered bay, the other shore was exposed to the full force of the sea. The students measured the heights, h, and the widths, w, of 60 limpets on each shore. Figure 1 shows a limpet and the measurements made by the students. So you can see they're measuring the width and the height just there. And it's got this muscular foot that attaches to the rock. On each shore, the students measured a large number of limpets at random locations. Explain why the students did this. So they did a large number of limpets. That's all about reliability. It's more representative of what the limpets in that area are like. Therefore, it provides a more valid investigation and we can calculate a mean limpet size. Random locations, just like in quadrat sampling, avoids bias. The students calculated height divided by widths for each limpet and the table shows their results. So let's take a look at the table. So they've done kind of a tally of how many limpets are within particular ranges for the height divided by width. So here's height divided by width, and then we've got these short ranges and we've tallied and then counted those numbers. Okay, to complete the table above, so we had 19 here, just counting those tallies up, 9, 4 and 1. And then we've got this graph here and you can see I've filled in those 4 bars for 19, which you can see is halfway between 18 and 20 there. And then for 9, for 4 and lastly for 1. And there weren't any in the exposed shore of this greater range here. Okay, so we've completed figure 2, that was the graph. Compare the patterns in the results for the exposed shore and the sheltered shore. So we can say all of these statements for the sheltered shore, or we can say the opposite for the exposed shore. So we've got a wider range of results in the sheltered shore. So we can see here all of these results compared to this narrower range of results on the exposed shore. We've got a higher mode, as we can see here on the graph. This one being the mode, number of limpets, so the most common. We've got no limpets between at 0.21 to 0.25, that's that gap there, and you can see it again on the table at the top there. And we've got none on the exposed shore in that wider range that I said about earlier on, so none up there. Okay, so there's a few possible marks there. Figure 3 shows how the students measured the width of the limpet with calipers. So there's the caliper, you've probably seen those in school. You can use this section of the caliper to measure inside a tube or something like that, and this section to measure across. I suppose it's probably going to be quite difficult where they position it. Are they going for the longest bit? Are they going for the narrowest? Somewhere in between? That's going to be something they'll have to think about. And it says here that the width of this particular limpet is 4.96 centimetres. One student recorded on the sheltered shore mean of height divided by width being this number here, which is a very long number, and the exposed shore being this number here. The student's teacher stated the data did not justify such a high number of decimal places. There's no need to measure to that many decimal places. The numbers are already different enough, and those small increments at the end aren't really going to make much difference. It's too high a resolution there. Give the 2 mean values corrected to an appropriate number of decimal places. Now I think that this is probably an older question. I think it's probably going to say how many decimal places or how many significant figures. So I've gone with what the mark scheme said, and let's take a look. So we've gone to either 2 decimal places or 3, and for the sheltered we've rounded up because we had a 5 there, so we've called it 0.47, or we could call it 0.466. And for the exposed, we've got 0.35, or we could have 0.354. Okay, try and keep to the same. So if you're going to go 2 or you're going to go 3, keep to the same. A limpet clings to a rock on the seashore using a muscular foot, as shown in figure 1. We saw that earlier. Scientists have found that limpets can exert a force of 2 newtons per centimetre squared of foot. To remain attached to its rock, a limpet must exert a force at least as large as the force of the waves. Calculate the maximum wave force. The limpet shown in figure 3, so that was the one where we had the width of 4.96 centimetres. I've taken that from this picture here. Okay, so I have to always go back and look at my other pages. Could withstand without being knocked off its rock. Assume the surface of the foot is a circle. So they've given us the area of a circle is pi r squared. That's very generous of them. You might not see that in your exams. They're not being that generous at the moment. And take the value of pi to be 3.14. That's quite important, because if you use pi on your calculator, obviously it's got a lot more decimal places there. So try to stick to 3.14 so that it's giving the answer that they are looking for. So I've taken that width, which was 4.96, divided it by 2 to get the radius. That gave me 2.48 as the radius. And then I've done pi times 2.48 squared. Sorry, I just knocked the tripod there. And that gave me 19.3 centimetres squared. Then I go back up to the question here where it said it can exert a force of 2 newtons per centimetre squared. So I've taken that number, that 19.3, and multiplied it by 2 to get me my force of 38.6 newtons. And I think that's where people might lose that final mark, because you've got to go back and think about how you're using your area answer with that force information at the beginning. Question G. Suggest 2 reasons why your answer to E might not be very accurate. As I said when I looked at the picture, I don't think the foot may be completely circular, so it's where do we measure? Do we measure the longest part kind of across the diagonal between the longest and the narrowest, or do we measure the narrowest? Variation in the rock surface, the texture of the rock, it might not be clinging smoothly, it might be a very jaggedy, bumpy rock that it can't cling to as easily. The foot may be larger or smaller than the outside of the shell, so it could be that we look down on it and we can't see the foot at all, or it could be that when we look down on it we see the foot coming out of the edges. Okay, so that's something to bear in mind as well. Last part on this question, suggest biological reasons for the lower mean height divided by width value for limpets on the exposed shore. So why do we have lower values? Well, on the exposed shore there's a greater force of the waves, so they're going to be knocking the limpets off. So the lower height reduces the exposure to the waves, gives it a wider foot, therefore more kind of gripping power, if you like. And those with the best features reproduce. It's that survival of the fittest again. The ones that are wider and shorter, that have got the best grip, will live longer, therefore passing those genes to their offspring. So we're covering a bit of Darwin in there as well. So that's the end of question 1. Let's have a look at question 2. Deliberately chosen because I think some people struggled with the old transect lines, so that's why I've chosen this one. Quadrat sampling I think we've got. We've talked about daisies on a field till, you know, forever. Random placement, all that kind of stuff. And let's have a look at a transect line. So we're still at the seashore. Tide comes in and goes out twice each day. Some students investigated whether 2 different species of seaweed could live only at certain positions on a rocky shore. Seaweeds are plant-like organisms that make their food by photosynthesis. Figure 1 shows 2 species of seaweed that the students investigated. So we've got bladderwrack on the left there with these air bladders. We've got sea lettuce on the right, and it really is kind of a fragile, thin, quite green plant. It's quite fragile really, and it's got a hold fast. Okay, so that's how it fixes to the rock and doesn't drift off or get washed away. The students place a 50-metre tape measure on the rocks at right angles to the sea. So it's going down. The beach, just like we've talked about in our examples. placed the quadrat next to the tape measure, recorded whether each species was present or not. So it's just an absence or presence that they've done there. So it's not counting numbers or looking at surface area or anything like that. It's just, is it there, is it not there? Okay. And here we have some student results. So the students repeated steps 2 and 3 every metre down the shore. So every metre they placed another quadrat just against the line of the transit line there. And figure 2 shows a section of the seashore and the students' results. So we can see the metre distance down the seashore there. We've got rock at the top, we've got pools of seawater, and we've got the sea, and we can see that it was 40 metres going down there. We've then got one of these diagrams which we can see, we've got the bladder wrack and the sea lettuce, and we're saying basically that because it was found at all of the quadrats in this section, we assume that it's present everywhere in between. So remember I talked about it being like battleships, okay? We kind of put this bar around all of it. And then we've got the sea lettuce in these kind of staggered places. But if you look, it lines up with those pools of seawater and with the sea. So that's something to bear in mind for the sea lettuce. The students placed the quadrat at regular intervals along the transit line rather than placing the quadrat at random positions anywhere on the rocky shore. So they've actually used those regular positionings of the quadrat. Explain why. And this is to get data about the position of the seaweed or the organisms, whatever it is, that they are looking at down that beach. And that's the second answer, the distance down the shore, therefore the amount of exposure it's got. So we're looking at regular intervals to get a clear pattern of data on the position of that seaweed, and we're looking at that down the entire shore to see how the exposure of seawater, bear in mind that tide coming in and out is going to fill those pools of seawater, these little rock pools up here. There's going to be some coverage of water here twice a day. How could the students have improved their investigation to ensure they produce valid data? This word valid is, it kind of encompasses everything. It talks about the precision of the data, the accuracy of the data, the reliability of the data. And if you've got all of these things sorted and you've only got, you've got all your control variables in place and all that kind of stuff, then we say that we've got a valid experiment, we're going to get valid data. So what we'd like to do really is pick up the transit line and repeat the entire transit line, maybe 5 metres across, and then maybe again. Okay, so we need to repeat it several times. The mark scheme said at least twice along the shore. I know that seems like it's just 1 mark, even though it's worth 2, but they're saying repeat several times, at least twice, for 1 mark, and along the shore, as in picking up that transit line and shifting it across and then repeating it. Okay, last page, doing well. Figure 2 is repeated here to help you answer the question. So exactly the same picture, just so that you don't have to keep flapping backwards and forwards the paper. You can imagine in the exam room everybody doing that at the same time. Probably gets a bit frustrating. Apologies for coughing there. The students concluded bladder wrack is better adapted than sea lettuce to survive in dry conditions. You can see it's in this area that links up here with the dry rock, no pools of water there. What is the evidence for this conclusion? So bladder wrack is further up the shore than the sea lettuce, therefore it's exposed for longer because obviously the tide isn't here for very a long period of time, but here it's obviously covered over for a longer time. And also we find that sea lettuce only in the water, in those rock pools or in the sea. So we saw that bit earlier where it matches up like this. Okay, right, last question. The bladder wrack has many air bladders. The air bladders help the bladder wrack to float upwards when the sea covers it. Suggest how this helps the bladder wrack to survive. Well, if it's floating, it's not going to have all of the debris of the water blocking the light, so it's going to get more light, absorb more light. and that will be used for photosynthesis, and more photosynthesis means more glucose, which means ultimately more growth. I hope you found that useful. Hope you found all of these interesting. This is I will be doing the B7 Quickfire question quiz, but I'll be setting that one before I set this one. So this is effectively the last video you're going to watch before the summer holiday. Hope you found it useful. Hope that the whole way that biology has been delivered has been productive, varied, and helped stretch you and improve your biology knowledge. Please hit subscribe to show your appreciation for the work I've done, and to see when new videos are available. I am going to start doing some weekly revision, just so that we can kind of keep our finger on the pulse and make sure that we're keeping all that information fresh, ready for next year. So watch out for those too. Thanks very much. Have a great day.